Leadership is hard. And I've got some good news and I've got some bad news for you. The bad news is that I can't make it any easier. But the good news is that we can work on it together to get better. And you want to know the secret? Who you are comes before what you do. It's form before function. So let's get to work together. I'm Preston Poore, and this is PQ. Hey, on today's episode of PQ, we're joined by Dr. Mark Whitacre, a man whose life took a dramatic turn on the day he was found guilty in one of the largest corporate scandals in history. Mark's journey from that fateful day through his time in prison and his eventual redemption have been shaped by remarkable mentors, including Chuck Colson, who played a pivotal role in his transformation. Now, as Vice President of Culture and Care at Coca-Cola Consolidated and Executive Director at T-Factor, Mark is dedicated to fostering positive change in the corporate world. Join us as we explore his powerful story of guilt, redemption, and leadership. Welcome to PQ, Mark. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Preston. It's good to be here.
Hey, let's jump right in to your story. You are being found guilty. You have a guilty verdict that's about to be read to you. Take us there that day. What were your emotions? What was going on? And we'll look back about what got you to that point, and then we'll also talk about what you've been doing since. But take me to that day.
Oh, I tell you, Preston, that was probably one of the most painful days of my entire life. I was 40 years of age at the time, so it was 27 years ago. But even still today, that was a very painful day. I had a 6-month plea agreement offer. My pride got in the way, and I didn't want to do 6 months, so I ripped up the plea agreement and went to trial instead. Now I was getting a 10-year sentence. There's no parole in the federal system. This is a federal white collar crime. There's no parole. You get 15% off good behavior. So it was really 8.5 years I was going to have to do, where I would have went to prison at 38 and got out at 38. Now I was going to trial. I was going to prison at age 40 and getting out at 48. And one of the most depressing days of my life. I literally attempted suicide around that time. Yes.
We'll talk about that probably in just a second. But Mark, thank you for sharing about that one moment in time. Tell us how you got there.
Oh, it was all my own doing. You know, show me your mentors. I'll show your future. And we had a 75-year-old CEO. We had a 70-year-old president, and I was 32 at the time when I joined there, and divisional president of the biotech division, the fastest growing division of the company. I was corporate vice president of the whole company. They published this in Fortune magazine. I was part of the succession plan to replace the COO and president. So I was going to be going from number 4 executive out of 32,000 employees, 70 billion in annual revenue. I was going to be going from number 4 to number 2 top executive in my 30s. Mm-hmm. And I was being mentored and show how to do price fixing, basically in a large price fixing scheme. And I was so obsessed with the position. I was so obsessed with being the future COO, and probably could have been the future CEO at some point with the age that I was. And I tell you, at that time in my life, Preston, sad to say, I probably would have stepped on my own grandma to get ahead and to move up that corporate ladder. And therefore, I dived right in, was being mentored to take over this international cartel. Eventually, I would have been leading it when the 75-year-old CEO and the 70-year-old president would have retired a few years later. And I got to the fork in the road, and I chose the wrong path. So it was my own undoing that led to this situation I was in, to being sentenced to 8.5 years in federal prison.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Your story's well documented. Even there's a movie that's been, I guess it's loosely based on the story with Matt Damon in it. And so wonderful things on that. But tell me a little bit. I was most intrigued when I first heard your story about your wife's role in all of this.
Yeah, the largest price fixing case in U.S. history would have not happened if it wasn't for my wife, Ginger. And I'll never forget, in November 5th, 1992, so you're talking 32 years ago, and I was 2 years at the company, And I was 34 years at age at the time, and the CEO was 77. And that's when they told me, they said, Mark, you're going to become our next COO and president. In a couple of years, we're going to mentor you, and we're going to start sharing some things with you in business that we've not shared with you. And that was regarding the international cartel, the price fixing, the collusion. And we're going to mentor you, and eventually you're going to lead this. And I shared that and I was being mentored for about 7 months. And then Ginger and I were having a conversation in November 92, and I shared it with her, and she was really troubled by that. She said, Mark, is that legal? And I said, well, Ginger, it's not legal. It's breaking antitrust laws, but they told me everybody does it. They've been doing it for 12 years, and this is the way business is done in the commodity business. So Ginger, look, we're less than a decade out of college. This is the real world. And I said, I have to do this. I said, I'm making millions. They told me I'd go from, with bonuses and stock options and base salary, I was about $3 million a year then. And keep in mind, I joined in 1989, about $3 million a year. That'd be equivalent to about 10 million today.
Big
and
bucks.
They said, when I become the COO with bonuses and stock options and base salary, I'll be about 10 million a year. And I remember Ginger said, Mark, I don't care about any of that. I'd rather have, we lived in a mansion with an 8-car garage. It was the CEO's home that we owned. And she said, I'd rather have a 2,000 square foot house and 2 Fords in the driveway, because I had Ferraris, BMWs, Mercedes, everything. It was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber and everything the world could offer. And she said, I want my husband back. I met you when you were in 8th grade, and you've really changed, and you've really got addicted to this lifestyle. You've got addicted. You've got a greed addiction. Mm-hmm. She said, you're obsessed with this position and the bells and whistles that go with it. And she said, I'm really troubled. And so I started explaining to her. She asked lots of questions about price fixing. And then when I told her the consumers pay this, the extra $1 billion a year that the company's earning, I said, the consumers pay this. And she said, you mean my grandma on $800 a month Social Security is paying for this, and we live in a mansion, we have a corporate jet and an 8-car garage? She said, Mark, I can't live with this. And we fought about it, probably one of the biggest arguments we've ever had in our life. And she finally said, I'd rather be homeless, she said, than live in a house where illegal activity. And she said, I'm turning you into the FBI, and I'm turning you in today.
Wow.
So we met with the FBI that very day.
Yeah. So I remember you telling me at one point, there's a difference between a whistleblower and an informant.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Ginger was what in this? She was the whistleblower?
Yeah, she was. A whistleblower is someone that sacrifices everything to do the right thing. She was willing to sacrifice everything we had, and we had it all, what the world had to offer. And she was willing to sacrifice it all. An informant is someone sitting in front of the FBI and has a choice to wear a wire or be arrested. And there's a big difference between a whistleblower and an informant. Huge difference.
Yeah, big difference. I have a couple questions going through my mind, but why you? Why did ADM, their leadership team, pick you?
Well, I lived in Germany for 4 years, and I was vice president of a company called Degussa, about a $30 billion company, second largest chemical company in Europe, now known as Evonik, right after BASF, second largest chemical company. And I was 2 years in New York with them, 4 years in Germany with them at their world headquarters. And I was doing joint ventures, with a joint venture with the CEO of ADM and the CEO of ADM, the two top leaders. It was one of the joint ventures for a couple of years, and I got to know them really well. And I had great mentors at Degussa. I mean, looking back, I should have stayed. Great mentorship. And again, I say this often, show me your mentors, I'll show your future. But ADM made a comment, the CEO, at one time. He said, Mark, you have a lot of bureaucracy here. We could do this a lot faster if we did it with you without Degussa, some of these projects. Mm-hmm. And why don't we just hire you? And I said, I'm 6 years of this company. I have great opportunities. They're preparing me and grooming me to go back to the USA at some point and be the president of Degussa USA, and has a couple thousand people in Degussa USA, a plant in Mobile, Alabama. And so a great opportunity, they were grooming me for. And he said, well, what do you earn? And we were Deutschmarks then. This was 1989. We were there when the wall came down between East Germany and West Germany. in 1989.
Wow.
And I told him, I said, in US dollars, that'd be about 400,000 US dollars. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a 350,000. And that was bonuses, stock options, total compensation, about 400,000 US. He said, Mark, I'll give you about tenfold that. I'll give you 350,000 base salary, and I'll make it with goals that are very attainable, and you can earn $3 million a year working for us.
Okay. Wow.
And I said, where do I sign? After I spent an hour, there's no way I'd ever leave. I said, where would I sign? And I remember when I went home in Frankfurt and told Ginger, I said, we're moving to Decatur, Illinois. I got a great opportunity. And I remember her first question was, she said, you didn't do it for the money, did you? And I did.
Yep, that's right. So it takes me to, I guess, Mark, this idea of clash of values, because there are some values, there were things percolating in you before this opportunity came up, right? And then Ginger, with her response, there were values that she held. Tell me a little bit about that clash of values, about where yours came from, and I'm really interested in the origin of that and why you wanted to have that level of income. Why were you pursuing those things?
I would say this, Preston. I would say during my high school years, grew up in a wonderful family. My mom just passed here less than a month ago at 91 years of age. Wonderful moral compasses in my parents. And I believe I had the values of morality, integrity, accountability, humility when I was in high school, class president, full scholarship for 8 years, bachelor's and master's, paid for by Ohio State University, PhD in biochemistry at Cornell University in the Ivy League. I really believe I had the right values and on the right direction then. But when I got into corporate America and I started earning what I was earning, it really became an addiction. And when I was at Degoose, I had the right mentors that had the values of morality, integrity. But when I joined ADM, those were not the values of the leadership of ADM. And I started becoming like my mentors. Mm-hmm. And I was so obsessed with the corporate jet and the mansion and the income, the 7-figure income, that I wasn't willing to walk away. And to Ginger, she was willing to walk away. So there was a big difference. She wasn't becoming obsessed with it. She was a believer, and she had faith in. She was a believer in Jesus at that time. I was not at that time. So we were two different places at that time in our life. And I was caught up in the world, and she was not. I was driving a Ferrari, and she had a 10-year-old Grand Cherokee. And I'll never forget, I said, Ginger, with next month's bonus, let me buy you a yellow Ferrari. I have a red one. And she said, Mark, I want to be a good steward for God. My car, 10 years old, probably has another 5 years. And I tell you what, Mark, I'm going to keep praying for you. That's what she'd say.
What a wonderful commitment. I heard Chuck Swindoll say one time that the Holy Spirit speaks through our spouse often. We don't listen to it. So true. That's happened in my life too. I get it. Really, I think it's, I want to dive in real quick about this idea about Chuck Colson and what your experience in prison, because I want to understand first, why were you, I guess you would say, maybe, were you an atheist at the time before?
Well, I will say this: in 8 years of college in the sciences, it's Big Bang Theory, evolution, Darwinism. Never met one Christian. Grew up in a Christian family. My parents forced me to go to church. My brother, I was the only child out of 4 to go to college. And I remember my mom was worried about the fact I was going to go to a secular college. She was worried, would she recognize her son when I got out of college? And after 8 years, she didn't recognize him. Oh, I've never met one Christian professor. And I had plenty of professors say, especially in the Ivy League, if you believe in God, you can't be a PhD scientist. I had one in physics say, if you believe in God, I want you out of my class. Mm. So you hear that for 8 years. I started telling all my friends in my early 20s. I started Cornell at 22 and finished PhD at 25. And I remember telling all my friends at Cornell that my parents are Christians because they didn't go to college and they didn't know better. So my education took me away from even considering God.
Wow. And so you're carrying all this greed, this addiction you had, and then this not a belief in God, obviously, right?
Yes.
You carry that into this situation, then you have the guilty verdict, you go to jail, right? And I remember you telling me in your story that you chose, and you opened that with, you had a chance to plea deal for 6 months, right?
Yes.
or 8 years.
Yes.
And your pride wouldn't let you go with the 6 months because you felt like you were in the right, or you thought you could get off of it, but you ended up with 8 years. So,
Well, Ginger was begging me to sign the 6-month plea agreement. I would have went at 38 and got out at 38. And I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, it's all your fault. You're the one who started this case. I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. So more than anything, it was simply the opposite of what Ginger asked me to do was the reason I ripped it up.
Okay.
My pride.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So we're struggling with all those things. And then you're in prison, right? And I think you told me that you had somebody share about the Lord before you went to prison. But then also Chuck Colson enters the picture. Tell me about that.
Yeah, there was some guy named Ian Howes from the pharmaceutical industry that reached out to me, didn't know me, I was a stranger, and reached out to me and started taking me through a Bible study before I went to prison, started giving me some hope, but I still had that 8 years of education that told me there is no God, and I couldn't erase 8 years of education. And especially then, I'm 40. I didn't even finish my education till 25, so I'm only 15 years out of college by that point, from the time I finished Cornell. So it was still fairly recent. And I remember Chuck Colson showed up, who was the White House counselor to President Nixon and went to prison during the Watergate scandal in the 70s. He's reaching out to me in 1998. He read about me in the Washington Post and saw a lot of his life in what he was reading about me. And I remember he showed up and he said, Mark, when you were at Cornell, did they talk much about God? And I said, oh, yeah, they talked a lot about God. I said, they talked about God not existing, and you can't be a scientist to believe in God. He said, well, I went to Brown, another Ivy League university, and I heard that all the time, too. And he said, that really impacted my life at that time. And then he asked this. He said, Mark, do you think there's a PhD scientist that believes in God? And I said, absolutely not. Not one in the world. And I said, I've never met one in 8 years of college. And he pulled out an article out of his jacket, and it was an article by Albert Einstein that said only God could create the universe and only God could create man. And then he left me an article. Sir Isaac Newton talked as much about Jesus as he did about God. I mean, he talked as much about God as he did about science. And I said, boy, they never told me that at Cornell or Ohio State. And he said, Mark, I'm telling you, they hide that. And he just discipled me, article after article, book after book. Francis Collins discovered the human genome, is a Christian. They sure didn't tell me that at the university. That some of the best scientists in the world believe in God, and the universities, secular universities, do not share that. And he discipled me the exact point, that kind of the weak point I had, that I can't have faith because you can't be a scientist and believe in God. And then he showed me some of the best scientists in the world have faith.
Right. So you were able then at that point, you could reconcile the two.
Yeah.
Right? And you saw how the connection between all that. Do you remember the moment when you actually gave your life to the Lord and said, I'm going to follow you, surrendered all of that?
I do. It was June 4th, 1998. I'm about 3.5 months in prison. And I'll never forget this date. This is after a couple dozen different books and articles that Chuck was sharing with me. And then we're talking about him when he visited me on weekends. And then he asked this. He gave me a book by an atheist in Minnesota, a scientist, a PhD biologist. And I'm a biochemist, so it was written in a very similar language is the way I think. And this atheist wanted to prove that God did not exist. He was a critic. And he studied and studied and studied exhaustively. And he was going to write at some point an article like in Time magazine or some high profile magazine that God does not exist. And it proved to him after all his exhaustive studies that God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. His name is Dr. Don Byerly, and the book is titled Surprised by Faith. I finished that book and I thought, how can you be a PhD scientist and not believe in God? And I remember it was about 2 a.m. I had a 13,000 square foot house for 8 years and $2 to $3 million a year every year for 8 years with bonuses and stock options. And now I'm $20 a month for 8 years in federal prison. And I had a 10 by 10, a concrete floor, a locker, and a roommate. And I remember getting down on my knees after I finished that book at 2 a.m. in tears. And I said, God, how was I so wrong? How can you be a scientist and not believe in you? And I criticized Ginger for being a Christian the past 10 years. I criticized my parents for being Christians all those years. And Father, they were right and I was wrong. And it started changing my life at that point. I finally took responsibility that it wasn't Ginger's fault. The case, it was my fault. I could have walked away from the company. They didn't put a gun to my head and I had to be involved with that illegal behavior. I could have left the company. And the following weekend when Ginger came, I was in tears and I told Ginger and my 3 children, I've got no one to blame but myself. And she could tell then something changed. And I would say our marriage started reconciling at that point, and we're married 45 years. The very person who turned me into the FBI, we're married 45 years.
That's awesome. Yeah. Praise God. That's a wonderful testimony to a spouse that stuck by you, right? Yeah. Through thick or thin.
Yeah. So and kept awesome praying testimony. For me and kept praying absolutely. For me.
Absolutely. So tell me about prison life then after your transformation. I remember I recount a story about somebody you helped get a GED, or you'd help some of the prisoners that you're with based on your education. You stopped looking on the inside and started looking outside to help others. Is that the case?
I did. I tell you, it changed my life. I prayed. Chuck said, Mark, you'll find even purpose the years you have left, which was 8 years left. Because I became a believer my 3rd month in prison. I had 8.5 years to do. And I prayed about how could I be productive in prison. And I looked around, I thought, where in the world are people more hopeless and helpless than federal prison? And I started discipling them with the same tools that Chuck Colson and Ian Howes had discipled me with. And then I also started helping many of them get their GEDs. I helped some of them get 2-year degree. Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, not Ohio State, but Ohio University offered free of charge, no cost, associate degrees for inmates. So I helped many of them get their 2-year degrees. I helped many of them get GEDs. I helped Spanish inmates speak better English and write better English. And I tell you, $20 a month, for the first time in my life, I was helping someone else that I'd never experienced in my life. I learned what servant leadership was because I never experienced it prior to that.
So it's this self-transcendence that you get out of yourself, away from just me and that selfishness that we typically have. And you had that experience. You mentioned the word purpose. I'm going to take you down a rabbit trail for a minute. Tell me about purpose. What are your thoughts on purpose? You've gone through this experience in your life. What do you tell other people about finding their purpose, what the purpose of life is? Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Well, prior to that prison experience and being a follower of Jesus and surrendering my life, I will say this. My purpose was to make as much money as I can, have as big as title as I can, become CEO. We were number 56 on the Fortune 500, and I was obsessed to eventually become the CEO of a Fortune 56 company. And after that, in prison, my purpose really became, I became more of a life of significance. How can I make the world a better place when I leave it than when I came? And I never thought that way prior to this. Never. It was selfish leadership versus servant leadership. But once my 3rd month in prison on that June 4th, 1998, I did think about it. Life is significant. I saw the purpose of my life is to serve others and to be that salt and light and to be that lighthouse for them, to see that, wow, no matter what adversity that man's going through, he sees positives and productive things he can do and be the example that God wants us to be. And my purpose changed tremendously from a selfish to a servant leader at that point in my life, and in a life of success to a life of significance. Yes. At that point in my life at age 40.
Yeah, you are a living testimony and monument of a shift from the idea of success to significance, right? That lasting legacy that we put out there.
Yes, 27 years now in that journey.
And you are. And so if you're okay, I want to shift a little bit now to, so let's talk post-prison. You get out of prison. I know that you said that you had a job with someone else. So you get hired by somebody else out of.
I did. I actually learned air conditioning and heating in prison because I thought, 8 years, I became good at it, because I thought, who's going to hire someone, a convicted felon coming out, even with an Ivy League PhD? I'm a convicted felon coming out at age 48. So I better be realistic. God wanted me to be realistic. And I learned air conditioning and heating. But several biotech and pharmaceutical companies read about me because it was a very high profile case. And they started visiting me in prison, 4 different companies. And they had me review their patents and possible ways how I could help improve their patents. Sometimes I barely had time for prison. I was so active and busy. And these are non-paid positions. They're not allowed to pay you, but it kept my mind active, still in the biotech world. So I was assisting these companies, and a couple of them offered me jobs the day I got out. I was shocked. And I joined one with a Christian CEO, Cypress Biotech, because I didn't want to fall back in that same trap of greed that I was in before. Show me your mentor, I'll show you your future. So I was joining one with a very servant leadership oriented CEO that I great respect when he was visiting me in prison. His name was Paul Willis. So I joined his company literally the day after I got out of prison, almost 2 decades ago. And at age 48, and I started off like right out of the level of college. And after 4 different promotions, I became the COO and president of the cancer research biotech company for almost 10 years, still on advisory board of that company today. And now for 7 years, I'm vice president of culture and care of Coca-Cola Consolidated, another faith-based, purpose-driven company. And I'm responsible for our faith integration at our organization, 17,000 employee company and a publicly traded company I work for now.
And I want to give a note to the audience real quick, and I want to take us down another rabbit trail. So it's funny how you meet people, right? I don't remember. You probably remember. I certainly remember the first day I met you. I was coming into Corinth, Coca-Cola, to do a workshop on vision. And I remember pulling into the parking lot, and I was invited by the leadership for a dinner. I come and sit down in this open seat, and I'm next to this jovial gentleman sitting next to me. We strike up a conversation. And I honestly had no idea who you were, to be quite frank with you. And you were so generous and so kind, and didn't talk about yourself. And then finally got down with the dinner, and Ken, who's one of the owners of Corinth Coca-Cola, goes, "Hey, Mark, why don't you tell Preston your story?" And you gave me the 3 or 4 minute piece on it. I was like, oh my gosh. And then we had a chance to sit next to each other before the workshop stuff, or you all were there for delivering some information sharing some information with the folks that were there in the workshop. But Mark, I want to tell you that through meeting all of that, I think it was a divine appointment on my side, at least, to be seated next to you and not know who you were, no expectations, and cut up and got a friendship on that. And so I'm honored and blessed by you being here. And then also our association with the Coke system, me working for the Coca-Cola company for 20 plus years, and then you at Coca-Cola Consolidated now. So I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you and all that.
Well, I feel the same way about you too, Preston. You're having a huge impact, and I love your book. And I'm reading the new one that you're currently writing, and you're having a huge impact. And I love the work you do.
Thank you. I'm honored by that, and love your leadership. Let's turn. I want to just tell me about Coca-Cola Consolidated right now, your culture piece. What are you doing? And then also T-Factor. I want to inform the audience about those 2 elements that you're involved in.
Yeah, culture and care department at Coca-Cola Consolidated reports to the chairman's department. This work's so important. It reports right to Frank Harrison's department, Frank Harrison and Josh Normandy, which is the chairman's department. And what we do is Frank Harrison, 23, we're a 122-year-old company. And Frank Harrison, even though we're publicly traded, the family has quite a significant stock ownership, and he's 4th generation. And 23 years ago, God put on his heart, this is God's company, not his. He's a steward for this company as the chairman, CEO, but it's not his company. And we have a purpose statement. Think about this, publicly traded company, a purpose statement to honor God in all we do by serving others, pursuing excellence, and growing profitably. But think about to honor God in all we do by serving others, publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. And then he put a chaplain in our Nashville plant 23 years ago. It's kind of a first step. And about a year later, the head of the Nashville plant called him up, said, if we take this chaplain out, we're going to have riots in the street. Our retention rates is up. It's changed our entire culture. So now we have 104 plant sites, and each one of them with a chaplain. in our
Wow.
plant. And that's part of our department, the culture and care department. I mean, it is, we basically have a chaplain for almost every 200 employees for our 17,000 employees. And
That's awesome.
marriages have been saved. Suicides have been prevented. It has transformed our culture. And the number of recommits and salvations we get per month is more than most churches. I mean, it's a huge number. I mean, God is so blessed. And in turn, God has blessed our business. Our retention rates are higher than other companies in the beverage business. And we have prayer groups. I lead 16 of the prayer groups myself, prayer groups and Bible studies. We have a discipleship program. When one recommits or surrenders their life to Jesus, then we plug them into a church and into a discipleship program and into a Bible study and a prayer group. We have a monthly chapel service called The Gathering, gathering faith, fellowship, and food. And they come for a free lunch, but they're going to hear a message. They're going to hear a Bible message. And we have a weekly devotional. It's audio that every Monday morning called Refuel, our department does, that we give to all our 17,000 employees, that even our truck drivers can hear it because it's audio. And it's amazing. We're a faith-friendly, purpose-driven company. And in turn, God has blessed our business tremendously.
It has, certainly. It's fantastic. Coca-Cola Consolidated, I believe, is the largest bottler in the United States.
That's correct.
In North America,
That's correct.
So
that's correct.
Great relationship with the company. Hey, let's shift real quick. I want to ask you about this idea around how is greater than what. As you know, I've got this philosophy that says how you do something is greater than what you do. How do you see that playing out in your career right now?
Oh, it makes such a difference how you do it. I think back when I was in my 30s, divisional president of one of the largest companies in the world at ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, and I would do anything to be able to go back and apologize to some of the people that reported to me or were impacted by me at that time, because it was all about moving up the corporate ladder. I looked at everyone. We had 4,000 employees in the biotech division, the division that I was president of. And it was about how they could help me move up the corporate ladder. And now the last 27 years of my life, it's more how I can help others improve their life. And I find it so rewarding to see others grow and learn and their lives improved. And that's all based on how you do it. And we do our training. It's called LEADS, and that's how we learn how to do it. And that's how our leadership learns. And it LEADS is L for listen, to have a level 3 listening, a listening level that maybe you've never had in your life. And it'll help you also with your children and your spouse too, when you get this level of listening. And then E for empathy. The empathy is so important with the how, because when you have empathy and really care for that person that's in front of you at that very moment, what a difference that makes. So it's the listening, the empathy, and then A in LEADS for advocate, to be the biggest cheerleader for the subordinates that report to you, to be their biggest cheerleader. And D for develop, help your subordinates develop more than you do yourself, because they're the next generation. Help them develop. Eventually, they're going to replace us older leaders. So to help them develop. And then S for self-reflection and prayer. Pray and reflect what you did during the week, what you wish you would have done, and do it differently on Monday. And I tell you, that listening and that empathy, that's the how. When you care about people, it changes lives.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's the old adage that John Maxwell and Theodore Roosevelt said: people don't know how much, or don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care, right? Yeah. It's funny, whenever I say that in front of an audience, I'll say the first part of that sentence, and then they'll kind of like a church response will say the second part. Is kind of fun for people because they all know that, they've heard that, but it's so true.
Well, we want our leadership to live that. We want 17. Frank Harrison's vision is 17,000 servant leaders is his vision.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good. I love it. What a difference maker out there, and differentiation for working in a culture like that. Yeah. Right. Really good. Hey, as we wrap up our conversation, I want to see, Mark, is there any thoughts as you, a leadership lesson you'd want to share with emerging leaders that are listening today I know you hearkened back and said, if I could speak to my younger self, I would change these things. But what's maybe one takeaway that you could summarize for people if you left and said, hey, here's one thing I want you to realize?
I would tell younger leaders this. What I would tell my 32-year-old self back when I became divisional president of ADM is live a life of significance. Make the world a better place. Care about people around you, and live a life of significance instead of this just life of success, which is your title and how big your house is and what kind of car you drive, and live a life of significance, and just really care for others. Be a servant leader and not a selfish leader. And I wish I would have done that in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, certainly. Putting people first, right? Living a
Yes.
life of significance and legacy. So excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Mark, thank you so much wisdom that you gave, and so kind of you and generous of you to give time today. But I'd love to move into the hot seat questions real quick. You okay with that? This is our
Yes, I
little-
do want to just say T Factors, where we share everything I shared about Coca-Cola Consolidated. We share with the world where other leaders can learn how to implement and integrate that in their own organizations. And we're actually doing one like tomorrow in Dallas, an in-person event. We've been doing 4 virtual and 4 in-person T-Factor events. And it's really our leadership, including our CEO, our COO, VP of HR. And we talk about our giving, and really we talk about how we integrate faith at work and the transformation it's had on our organization, where other companies can do something similar. And we're launching here this month an on-demand version where people can watch it at their own convenience, experience T-Factor at their own experience, and even in different languages.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. And so I participated in a T-Factor. So everything you said on that, I can validate on it. And it's a wonderful opportunity. So what we'll want to do, Mark, if somebody wants to learn more about T-Factor, where can they go?
T-Factor.com.
Okay.
T-Factor.com.
Excellent. We'll include that in our show notes as we do it. Anything else on your mind?
No, I'm ready for the lightning round.
All right, here we go. We're going to go into the hot seat questions with Mark. All right, 10 questions. Let's have a little fun with them. And I may ask you some whys and whatnots to learn a little bit more about you. But the purpose, obviously, is for folks to get to know you a little bit more outside of the stuff we just talked about. So what's your favorite TV show right now?
The Chosen.
The Chosen.
Yeah.
All right. Have you watched season 4?
Yes, we have. We finished season 4, and we can't wait till season 5.
Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff on that. Okay, pineapple on your pizza, yes or no?
No.
Okay,
and good. I love about everything on pizza, but not pineapple.
Very good. What kind of pizza do you like? What's your favorite?
Sausage and hot peppers, jalapenos.
Awesome. Love it. All right. If you could visit any fictional world, where would you go?
I tell you, my favorite country, and I think it's the cleanest country and an amazing country, is Singapore. So it would be a country that's just clean. It seemed to care about people, and it's a safe place. I've seen people not lock their cars, not lock their front doors, and I thought, wow, what a neat place that would be if the whole world existed like that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? I've heard great things about Singapore. That's wonderful. All right, cats or dogs?
Dogs, and we have 2 of them.
Okay, good. I love dogs too. Thank you. I'm sure you sing a lot of karaoke, Mark. What's your go-to karaoke song?
Don't Stop Believing. Don't Stop Believing by Journey. Because I think there's kind of a faith tone to that, even though they probably didn't intend it to be.
There is. Very good. Okay, here's another kind of travel question. If you could travel time, would you rather visit the past or the future?
The future.
Why?
Because I think the future, I know there's a lot of negativity about our future, but I really think our future is bright. I really do. I think God has this. And I know there's a lot of division right now and in our country and in the world, but I think our future is really bright. And I see the young people that I'm mentoring myself, and I thought our future is bright.
That's so good. I talk to a lot of different people, Mark, that feel the same way, that the next generation coming up, we do have a brighter future than we might think sometimes. So that's great. All right. How about beach vacation or mountain retreat?
Mountain retreat. We've been 7 years in a row to Teton and Yellowstone, 7 years. And this will be our first year we're not going there. And we hike from sun up to sundown. And it'll be our first year we're rafting 17 miles down Grand Canyon in 3 weeks from now.
Well, that'd be fun. I'll love to hear your adventure about how that goes. The Tetons are a fantastic area, the Yellowstone area and all that. A lot of fun. Let's see. If you could only listen to one song for the rest of your life, what would it be? One song.
I think it would be don't stop believing.
Okay, you like Journey.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think, like I said, I hear it. I hear what the reason is behind those words, probably different than what they intended.
Yeah, and they speak to you differently, so that's good.
Yes.
And it's a great
Don't stop
theme song.
believing.
That's right. I love it. And then last question, what's one thing that others might not know about you?
That I love hiking. I know we mentioned that's where my wife and I's favorite pastime is. And also I hunt. I bow hunt with a compound bow. And been hunting for the past several years, and probably
what do you
wouldn't know
hunt?
that.
What do you hunt?
Whitetail.
Whitetail deer. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. That's impressive. That's awesome. Okay. Love it. Really good. Mark, you've been a wonderful guest today. Thanks for playing along with the hot seat. And thank you so much for the generosity of your time. I know you've got your hands in a lot of different things, responsible. You're traveling a lot and doing exactly what you told us you're doing with Coca-Cola. So we appreciate that. Hey, to the listeners, if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can subscribe to my new email. And also, if you would, put, I guess, a review for this podcast on the streaming service that you listen to it on, and give us a rating and share it with others. And thanks for your time today. I'm Preston Poore. This is P Cubed. Take care and talk soon.